Geek here, and today I'm going to talk about 3 of my favorite highly influential horror movies. I normally do top 10 lists and things like that, but I want to actually do a little bit more of a discussion piece on 3 movies that I really enjoy and I believe are really important in the horror movie genre. Because I'm going back in the Wayback Machine to find some good old-fashioned Scarra movies. I go over 3 of my all-time favorite, highly influential horror movie gems. The first movie I'm going to talk about today is the 1965 horror anthology film, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors.
I call it my house of horrors.
How does it work?
The person whose fortune is to be told touches the cards 3 times. Then they are shuffled and dealt. The first 4 cards predict his destiny. The 5th gives him the knowledge to change it, if change is possible.
Really? Do we have to suffer all this nonsense?
This movie was directed by Freddie Francis, and it's starring some really heavy hitters, and not just horror movies, but just film in general. Number 1, we have Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and Donald Sutherland. I couldn't get a good solid answer, even with IMDb, if this was Donald Sutherland's first film, but close enough at least. Dr. Terror's House of Horrors is a horror anthology film that follows 5 characters that meet on a train. These 5 men are sitting in a cabin where Peter Cushing walks in and starts talking about tarot cards and the meanings and so on and so forth. So the 5 men get curious and decide to find out what their futures are, and Peter Cushing tells them these little horror stories from his tarot cards. It's 5 different stories in this. All solid. That's the thing I like about it. They're all solid stories. Donald Sutherland's story is really great. He plays a guy whose wife may or may not be a vampire. Then we have Christopher Lee, an art critic, overly abusive art critic that he plays. There's also a musician who steals some drum lines from voodoo priests that causes him to be cursed and chased by this voodoo god. And so these are the kind of stories that are in it. It's a vast array of different types of horror films. And that's one of the things I absolutely love about anthology films, is I get to watch like 3 or 5 short little horror movies but the best ones also are the ones that kind of come together at some point. Like this film right here, in 1965. Now, this was not the first first horror anthology film. This is more like the second, actually. You see, this movie is actually paying homage to another film, 1945's Dead of Night. Now, I have not seen this movie. I know that it's a British horror film, and so is Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. I was always under the impression that Dr. Terror's House of Horrors was the first anthology film, but when I was doing some more research, I then learned about the 1945 film, Dead of Night. So it may not have been the first movie, but it is more responsible for the creation of the genre than the actual first movie. Make sense? Okay, so there you go. Our good friends over at Tubi TV has this one streaming for free right now. So if you want to check this movie out, I suggest highly downloading Tubi TV and checking it out for yourself. I believe it's on Pluto TV also, but I know for a fact it's on Tubi because I watched it last night. The second film I want to talk about today is a movie that I truly feel does not get enough love from horror fans, 1962's Carnival of Souls. Carnival of Souls is directed by Herk Harvey, This movie is about a woman who survives a car accident. Not just any car accident, but one of a car flying off of a bridge into a river. So while they're looking for the dead bodies, she comes just kind of crawling out of the river. So this leads to her having a bit of PTSD, which causes her to start having some strange visions. In these visions, she starts seeing this man who is director Herrick Harvey. He's just this creepy, ghoulish figure that just with a real pale face that just shows up in the background of her when she sees things every so often with a smile on his face. He just pops up every now and then. She looks down a stairwell and he's like, "Beep." The fact that this movie really doesn't get a whole lot of attention is really surprising. This was an early independent horror movie. If you're a fan of independent horror and you think that independent horror is on the cutting edge and that's where you need to go, then this is the movie for you, because it really started the entire genre of independent horror movies. It allowed filmmakers to make a movie that they really wanted to make, rather than a studio hanging above them constantly breathing down their throats. So, Carnival of Souls was filmed on an excruciatingly small budget of $33,000. She's in a car accident, comes out of the river, starts to have these strange visions, seeks out the help of a psychiatrist who helps her kind of get back into normal life. She takes a job as an organ player at a church in another town, so she travels to another town to kind of get away from everything that happened from the accident. Renting a room at a boarding house, and across the hall is a really creepy, forward, just kind of gross dude. Even though he's kind of a total creep, it's really the only person in the entire movie that she has any contact with, and it's the only person that she can ever turn to for any kind of assistance or help or anything, and he's just a complete creep, and it's just horrible to have to watch this. Anyways, while this is going on, she is still having all of these visions of this ghostly guy, and she starts to be drawn to this abandoned amusement park, where she runs into an entire room full of these same ghostly type figures dancing around. This is a movie that came out in 1962, I want to remind you, and it is really kind of scary. It does stick with you and scares the pants off of you. Now, I'm not going any further than the abandoned amusement park. I'm not going to talk anymore about what happens at this abandoned amusement park, because there's a really cool twist ending to this movie. So, there you go. That is 1962's Carnival of Souls, directed by Herrick Harvey, and if you are one of those lucky HBO Max subscribers, this movie is on HBO Max, and I highly recommend checking this movie out. Now, the final movie I'm going to talk about today is not an American film. This is actually a French film, so I am not going to attempt to even pronounce the names of the actors or the director or anything like that, because you can find this movie by just its name. So, and what movie am I talking about? Well, it's 1960's Eyes Without a Face. A lot of people use the term for movies like this called slow burns, but I really don't feel Eyes Without a Face is your typical slow burn. This movie keeps you entranced from the beginning of it to the very end. I'm not one who really enjoys foreign films. I don't mean that like I think American films are better. My problem is honestly subtitles are faster than I can read, and I miss things, and I have to go back and I have to watch it again, and it's just sometimes subtitles can just drive me up the wall. So that's the only reason why I don't watch a lot of foreign movies. This movie, however, Eyes Without a Face is one of the movies that I feel that if you are a fan of horror movies, you should watch this movie. It's about this doctor who is trying to prove this theory of his about being able to connect skin tissue together. Now, while that's happening, his daughter is in a horrible, horrible accident that leaves her horribly disfigured. This is a film from 1960. It is surprisingly gory for that time period. There's a whole scene where they do an operation, a woman's face off of her. And so what they're trying to do is, this doctor begins to kidnap women in the community and tear their face off and put it on his daughter's no face. And sometimes it works for a limited time, and it's just a messed up movie. It really is. This is, again, I keep saying, it's a very surprisingly gory film for 1960. There's a lot here. That whole scene with the face getting taken off, that's whew, it's pretty horrific. This movie has influenced a lot of horror movie filmmakers. One, importantly, and this is why I say this movie is highly influential on modern horror, the mask that she wears in this movie is the same look and design that John Carpenter wanted for Michael Myers' mask. Face, no expressions, fang, and there you go. That's what led to the Michael Myers mask, was this movie, Eyes Without a Face. Also too, if you want to watch Eyes Without a Face right now, it is on HBO Max again. So anyways, 1960s, Eyes Without a Face. Great film, French, subtitled, but it holds your attention. Yes, I did run into the problem where it went really fast at the beginning before I got get my rhythm going with these subtitles, but I got there, and once I did, oh man, it was like seamless. I was able to watch the movie, read the subtitles just fine. Alright guys, that brings us to the end of this video. As I always say, keep watching movies, folks, because you know I'm gonna.